Welcome to Moonlitwest, where gentle stories take you to a peaceful world amidst the hustle and bustle of life. Today, we will share with you a special story called The Last Sunrise. Although the sunrise in the story is just a metaphor, it holds a profound meaning about the last day of a couple, when love and appreciation transcend all pain. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join Moonlitwest on our upcoming emotional journeys. Now relax, let your mind settle, and step into the story of the last sunrise. The scenery on an autumn morning was like a blurred painting, with golden leaves fluttering down onto the quiet road. The first rays of sunlight glided through the window of a small house, casting a soft glow on the faded fabric-covered chairs, highlighting the uncanny stillness of the space. In this room, John sat alone at the old dining table, the cup of coffee in his hand long gone cold. The house was silent. No laughter, no conversations, only the ticking of the clock echoed in the air. He looked out the window, watching the dewdrops still clinging to the branches, but his mind wandered far away, spinning in vague thoughts. He didn't know where to begin or how to feel about life anymore. Emily, his beloved wife, was in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast. She was no longer the vibrant, spirited woman he once fell in love with. Instead, Emily now seemed like a shadow of herself, tired, silent, and muted within her own home. She did everything out of habit, not for joy, but out of responsibility. They no longer shared stories, no longer found joy in small moments, no longer had those unexpected hugs or soft words of affection. The love between them, if it still existed, had become an old, worn-out habit, adrift in the stillness of their days. John's gaze swept across the dining table, where newspapers and unopened books were piled up. They lived in the same space, but as if in two different worlds. All they did was pass by each other, unconsciously, like two parallel trains that would never meet again. He had once loved Emily deeply, but now he couldn't pinpoint exactly when they began drifting apart like this. He only knew that everything seemed to have changed a long time ago, but he hadn't noticed, hadn't had the chance to notice until it was too late. "Aren't you having breakfast?" Emily turned around and asked, her lonely voice pulling John out of his thoughts. He looked at her and saw the lines on her forehead and the fatigue in her eyes. A strange feeling rose within him. Was it pity or emptiness? He couldn't say for sure. "I'm not hungry," John replied curtly, but not because he didn't want to eat. He simply didn't know what to say. She had once been his life, the reason he woke up every morning. But now all that was left were lifeless words and a haunting silence. Emily said nothing more, continuing her work, and the room fell into silence once again. John felt a nameless sadness spreading in his chest, as if a huge void was slowly consuming him. He could sense that their love had faded, but he didn't know how to mend it. He didn't realize that at that very moment, Emily was also lost in her own sorrowful thoughts, wondering if there was still a chance to rekindle their love, or if it was already too late. On a late autumn day, as the faint sunlight gave way to gray clouds, Emily boarded the last train home. The train was quiet, with only a few weary passengers rushing to end their day. Emily sat alone by the window, holding her handbag lightly on her lap. She looked outside as the city lights began to flicker on, reflecting through the train's glass. A sense of fatigue but peacefulness enveloped her, as if she just wanted to drift into sleep and forget everything. She didn't feel anything unusual, just one single thought circling her mind: to go home, to be with John. The train suddenly jerked to a stop, causing Emily to lean slightly forward. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary until a sharp pain struck her chest. It felt as if something was squeezing her heart, making her breaths shallow and rapid. The pain was intense, but Emily dismissed it as everyday exhaustion. But then, an icy chill coursed through her body, and she could no longer sit still. She clutched her chest, her vision blurred, and everything around her seemed distant, surreal. Meanwhile, John was sitting on the familiar chair in their living room, waiting for his wife to return. The evening was quiet, the house unchanged, except for the television playing old programs that neither of them cared for anymore. He thought he might read a book or cook dinner for the two of them, but as the clock struck 9 p.m., a vague sense of worry began to rise in his chest. Emily still hadn't come home. His phone suddenly rang, startling him. He answered the call, not knowing it would change everything. "John, this is the doctor. Emily, she didn't make it." The voice on the other end was hollow, like a dagger stabbing into his heart. John stood frozen, his hand trembling as he held the phone, his eyes wide with disbelief at what he had just heard. What was happening? Everything seemed to collapse and shatter in an instant. John stepped out of the house, but his legs felt locked in place by an inexplicable confusion. Everything around him suddenly became blurry, as if the light from the street lamps was veiled by a thick fog. His lips moved, but no words came out. Panic and despair washed over him like a violent wave, drowning every thought in his mind. He couldn't remember how long he had been walking, only that each step felt like a knife stabbing into his heart, as if everything in the world had crumbled. His heart pounded relentlessly, each beat like a futile cry to a place he could never reach. Emily's image was still vivid in his mind, her long hair gently draped over her shoulders, her eyes bright as she smiled. But now, all of it was in the past. She was gone, and he hadn't been able to do anything. His entire body felt lifeless, stripped of all the sensations that had once been a part of him. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. His eyes stung and hot tears streamed down his face, but he couldn't stop walking. Everything around him became a blur. All he could hear was the sound of his heartbeat, thudding loudly in his ears. Everything else seemed twisted, tangled in a dark, incomprehensible void. Why her? He asked himself unconsciously, his heart feeling as though it might burst. Why hadn't he noticed, hadn't felt anything was wrong before it was too late? He had missed everything. He had lived in a world without sharing, without love, without words spoken from the heart. Emily deserved all the good things in the world, yet he had let her leave in indifference. The pain radiated from his chest, as if his body were mirroring the anguish his soul couldn't contain. Each second of the journey felt endless, as if he were trapped in a spiral with no escape. He tried to focus, to suppress the urge to collapse, but he couldn't. The emptiness, the vast void in his heart, made it impossible to keep moving forward. All he could do was blindly rush toward the hospital where Emily lay. He wanted to scream, to wake up the entire world, but all he could do was keep walking, even though each step was agony. Every second, every minute, time seemed meaningless, leaving only an overwhelming regret and the fear that he would never have the chance to tell her he loved her, never have the chance to make sure she didn't leave in such cold silence. When he arrived at the hospital, it was already too late. Emily had left in silence, without a single word. She had died amid the rush of life, among strangers, and the more painful truth was that she had passed with love for him still in her heart, with her mind still holding the happy memories they had shared. John stood by the hospital bed, looking at his wife's peaceful face, as if she were merely sleeping. He couldn't believe it. Tears streamed down his face uncontrollably, not out of grief alone, but because he had failed to say the words of love that should have been said. He had let years of neglect and indifference stretch on, and now, it was all too late. As he sat beside Emily's lifeless body, a hollow emptiness consumed his mind. He looked at her cold hands, feeling the stark distance between them. All he could do now was piece together old memories, the sweet moments he had taken for granted. He wondered if he could have done more, if he could have gone back to tell her he loved her so much, that he would change, that he would never let their love fade. But all that remained were unanswered questions, regrets that could never be erased. Emily was gone, taking with her all the beauty of their love. But for John, she would forever be an irreplaceable part of his life, even if he lived for 1,000 years. John returned home after a long night at the hospital, carrying with him an enormous void in his soul. The house was now cold, empty, as if it too recognized Emily's absence. Everything that belonged to her was still there. The coat she often wore hung on the rack. The book she had been reading left on the sofa. But now, they were just fragments of a painful memory. He collapsed onto the chair next to the dining table, where they used to sit together every morning. Her coffee cup was still there, with a faint lipstick stain that served as a haunting reminder that she had been here just yesterday. John couldn't stop his tears. He didn't bother tidying up or eating. In the days following Emily's death, he lived like a ghost, wandering through the house with sunken eyes, a gaunt face, and a heart weighed down by regret. He couldn't forgive himself for letting her go without the love she deserved. That night, John fell asleep on the chair, his body exhausted from the torment of his emotions. In his dreams, Emily appeared radiant, just as she had been when he first met her. She smiled, her voice gentle as she called his name, but when he tried to reach out to her, she vanished like smoke. He woke with a start, his heart racing, his breaths quick and uneven. As he looked around, the faint light of the first morning sun streamed through the window. Everything seemed normal, but not quite. John stood up, feeling an uncanny familiarity in the air. The sounds, the images, the scents, everything was exactly like the day before Emily passed. He walked through the living room and saw Emily sitting on the chair, holding a newspaper. She turned to look at him, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, my love," she said, her voice as sweet as always. John froze. His heart felt as though it had stopped. Impossible. Was this a dream? Had he gone mad? Yet Emily was there, vibrant, radiant, as if nothing had ever happened. He stepped forward, his legs trembling, and tears involuntarily welled up in his eyes. "Emily," his voice cracked, his lips quivering. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. John couldn't answer. He looked at her, unable to decide whether to laugh or cry. His trembling hand reached for her shoulder, feeling the warmth he had thought he'd lost forever. When he sat down, everything began to make sense. The events of this day, every word, every gesture, all mirrored exactly what he remembered from the day before Emily's death. A terrible yet hopeful realization flooded his mind. He had returned to that day, and this time he had a chance to change fate. He didn't know why, couldn't comprehend how this was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let Emily leave without knowing she was loved. He would do everything, whatever it took, to save her. That morning, John woke with an intense sense of urgency. He looked around the familiar room, the gentle golden sunlight filtering through the curtains. Emily was still asleep beside him, her breathing steady, a serene rhythm in the chaos swirling inside him. He promised himself, today will be different. Today, I will save her. When Emily woke up, John had already prepared breakfast with everything she loved. The small dining table was neatly set, plates carefully arranged, and he had made a warm soup she usually only had on special days. When she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes widened in surprise. "You're up early," Emily said, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "I wanted today to be special," John replied, his voice calm, though his eyes betrayed a sense of urgency. During breakfast, he urged her to eat a little more, speaking about the importance of taking care of her health. "You're always so busy. At least let me take care of you today," he said, trying to persuade her to take the day off. But Emily shook her head gently, declining. "I'm fine, John. Don't worry too much," she said, as if unaware of anything unusual. When she was about to leave for work, John suddenly took her hand, his eyes filled with worry. "Emily, I think you should stay home today. We can go for a walk, visit the park, or just stay home and talk. Anything, as long as you don't overwork yourself." She looked at him, slightly furrowing her brows, then smiled as if to reassure him. "You're acting so strange today, but I promise I'll come home early," she said, planting a light kiss on his cheek before stepping out the door. John felt a wave of helplessness rise within him. Despite his efforts to change everything that morning, everything unfolded exactly as he remembered. Every action, every word Emily spoke was identical, as though this day had been predetermined. He watched the clock, each passing minute cutting into him like a knife. He tried everything he could think of to intervene, calling Emily to urge her to come home early, offering to pick her up from work, even fabricating a reason to keep her from taking the fateful train. But nothing worked. His advice was dismissed by her confidence that everything was fine by 9 a.m. John sat silently in the living room, his mind spinning with thoughts. He had tried everything since Emily woke up, meticulously preparing breakfast, urging her to skip work, even crafting excuses to keep her home. But none of it changed anything. Her words, her actions, all unfolded exactly as he remembered from that fateful day, as if everything had been preordained. He looked at the clock on the wall, each second passing like a dagger cutting deeper into his heart. Time seemed to move faster, dragging him closer to the inevitable. He felt the weight of powerlessness bearing down on him, a hollow feeling that no words could describe. John began to realize that Emily's death was something he couldn't change, no matter how hard he tried. His heart felt like it was being crushed as he confronted this painful truth. But amidst the despair, a spark of clarity ignited in his mind. If he couldn't change fate, the one thing he could do was love her fully in every remaining moment. As the soft morning light gave way to the warmer glow of daybreak, John looked at Emily, the woman who had shared so many years of his life. A fierce emotion welled up within him, not fear of losing her, but determination. He couldn't alter destiny, but he could make every moment they had left count. "Let's do everything we've never done before," John suggested, his voice brimming with emotion. Emily looked at him, her eyes showing a hint of surprise. "It's almost time for me to go to work, John. Can't we do it another day?" she said, though her tone lacked its usual firmness. John took her hand, his eyes brimming with sincerity, almost pleading. "Please, Emily, I've never asked you for anything this important. I just want us to spend one day living fully together, like we did in the beginning. Just one day, Emily." Emily gazed deeply into his eyes, feeling a yearning she hadn't seen in him for so long. There was something in John's expression that softened her resolve. She was silent for a few seconds, then nodded gently. "All right, I'll take the day off, but you'd better make it worth it," she said with a smile, her eyes twinkling John felt his heart grow lighter. This was his only chance, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Emily thought this was just a day to rekindle their relationship, but for John, it was everything, a chance to love her again before it became impossible to change anything. John took Emily to a lush green hill they had promised to visit back in the early days of their love. The long path to the hilltop was lined with trees, swaying gently under the sunlight. Emily sat beside him on a small wooden bench, the wind lightly brushing through her hair. She closed her eyes, breathing in the fresh air. John watched her intently, every little movement of hers etched deeply into his memory. "I've always wanted to bring you here," John said softly, "but I kept letting things slip by until I nearly forgot. I'm sorry, Emily." Emily turned to him, her gentle eyes meeting his. "You don't need to apologize, John. We're here now, and that's enough." Next, they stopped by a small roadside nursery. Emily's face lit up as she picked out a tiny oak sapling. "Let's plant this and watch it grow every day," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. Back at home, they worked together to plant the sapling in their backyard. Their hands were covered in dirt, but both of them laughed wholeheartedly. "You know," John murmured as he patted down the soil, "this tree will grow just like our love. It'll stay here even when—" His voice faltered, thick with emotion. Emily gently took his hand, her soft smile reassuring him there was no need to finish the sentence. That afternoon, John brought Emily to an orphanage. The children cheered as they saw the couple arrive. Emily crouched down, speaking to each child with warmth, her eyes filled with love. She played games with them, shared funny stories, and each of her smiles was like a beam of light piercing through John's heart. He stood at a distance, watching her as if trying to capture and hold on to this image forever. As dusk settled, John brought Emily to the city's central square, where twinkling lights illuminated the space. A street band was performing, and John unexpectedly stepped onto the small stage. Borrowing the microphone, Emily stood stunned among the crowd as John began to sing. His voice wasn't perfect, trembling at times from the depth of his feelings, but every word carried the weight of his love. It was her favorite song, sung straight from his heart. When the song ended, John stepped down, holding a vibrant bouquet, and knelt before her. "Emily, I love you. I've loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I will love you forever. Please give me the chance to say this more often, in every moment we have left." Emily broke into tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. She leaned down, embracing him. "You don't need to ask for a chance, John. I've always known, and I've always felt it." That night, on the last train of the day, John and Emily sat side by side, holding hands, their eyes exchanging tender looks of love. John knew that time was running out, but in this moment, he felt as though nothing in the world mattered except that she was here, beside him, and he was loving her with all his heart. John thought to himself, love cannot save a life, but it can make every moment with the one you love eternal. As the night deepened, John and Emily boarded the last train home. This was the same train Emily had taken alone on that fateful day, but this time, John chose to stay by her side until the very end. He wanted to ensure that if the inevitable happened, Emily wouldn't face it alone. The train moved slowly through the city streets, the golden glow of the streetlights reflecting faintly on the fogged-up windows. Emily leaned against John's shoulder, her eyes half closed, her face serene, as if savoring each peaceful moment. "Today was wonderful, John," she whispered, her voice as gentle as a passing breeze. "I truly felt loved." "You have always been loved, Emily," John replied, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry for making you feel lonely all this time." Emily shook her head softly, saying nothing, but she squeezed his hand tighter as if to respond. As the train reached a small station midway through the journey, Emily suddenly gasped, her hand trembling as she clutched her chest. She tried to speak, but no words came out. John immediately realized what was happening. "Emily, no, you'll be okay. I'm here." His voice shook with fear and desperation. Nearby passengers noticed and quickly called for emergency help. A man with a small first aid kit rushed over, trying to assist. John held Emily close, pressing his face against hers, his voice breaking. "Emily, stay with me. I need you. I can't live without you." Emily opened her eyes for a brief moment, her lips moving faintly. "John, thank you for today. I love you." Then she smiled softly, her breath slowing until it finally stopped. John cried out, shaking her gently, but it was too late. Emily was gone, but this time she didn't leave alone. She passed away in the arms of the man she loved, her heart filled with love. A few days later, John stood by Emily's grave, a small bouquet of flowers in his hand. He looked at the headstone where the words were engraved: "Beloved wife, wonderful companion, forever in my heart." The wind blew gently, carrying the fresh scent of grass and trees. John bowed his head slightly, his eyes filled with sorrow, but no longer empty. He had learned to accept that some things could not be changed, but he also knew that his love for Emily had left an indelible mark. As the days passed, he lived not only for himself, but also for her, to continue spreading the values she had left behind. John cared for the small oak tree they had planted together, watching it grow day by day as a testament to their love. He continued to work with the orphanage, where Emily had once shone with her boundless kindness. Each night, as he looked up at the starry sky, he would whisper, "Emily, you were never alone, and you will always be here within me." For John, death could not separate their love. It merely transformed into a new form, where Emily always resided in his heart, forever. Thank you for listening to the story, The Last Sunrise with Moonlitwest. We hope this story has brought you peace and warm emotions as you drift into sleep. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can join us on more magical journeys ahead. Now, pull your blanket snugly, relax, and let gentle dreams take you to a new world. Sleep well, and we'll see you again under the soft glow of Moonlitwest, wishing you a peaceful night.